Welcome to the Truth Dark Psychology. Tonight we invite you to cross the threshold into the mind of Steve Jobs, a figure who was worshipped as a genius, feared as a boss, and remains endlessly dissected by those seeking the secret behind his legendary impact. What hidden drives and psychological strategies made Jobs so unique? How did darkness, obsession, trauma, and manipulation fuel the legacy of a man who changed the world, but often at tremendous personal and collective cost? Before we peel back the layers, make sure you're subscribed, hit like, and join the debate in the comments. Your insights and questions are what make this channel truly different. Let's begin our descent into the psychological labyrinth of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was not just passionate, he was consumed by a need to manifest his vision at any cost. This wasn't ordinary ambition, it was an unrelenting obsession. Jobs believed he was put on earth to create beauty, simplicity, and meaning from chaos, and he expected everyone around him to share this singular focus. His fixation on perfection meant that every detail, from the inside of a circuit board to the color of a box, mattered. This obsession produced extraordinary outcomes. Under Jobs' leadership, teams at Apple didn't just make products, they made cultural touchstones. But obsession, by its very nature, has a dark edge. For Jobs, every deviation from his vision felt like a personal betrayal. The intensity he demanded from his teams was legendary, but so too was his capacity for cruelty when disappointed. Stories of public humiliation, explosive anger, and emotional manipulation abound from those who worked with him. For Jobs, obsession left no room for compromise, often leading to all-or-nothing thinking. A project was either insanely great or worthless. This black-and-white mentality created an atmosphere of high stakes, where failure meant not just professional disappointment, but existential devastation. The cost was severe. Staff turnover was high, and the personal price for those who stayed was emotional exhaustion. Obsession also fueled Jobs' capacity for focus. He could block out everything that didn't serve his goals, whether it was personal relationships, ethical dilemmas, or even his own health. This laser focus allowed him to accomplish what others saw as impossible, but it often blinded him to nuance, empathy, and the collateral damage he left behind. Yet, for all its destructiveness, Jobs' obsession was a kind of creative fire, a relentless hunger that burned away the mediocre, forcing innovation to rise from the ashes. The legacy of this obsession is everywhere, in devices millions use daily, and in the stories of both inspiration and warning that surround his name. One of the most enduring legends about Steve Jobs is his so-called reality distortion field. This wasn't just charisma, it was a psychological phenomenon. Jobs had a unique ability to impose his vision so forcefully that people around him began to believe the impossible was possible. This manipulation, intentional or not, could convince engineers to achieve deadlines they thought were fantasy, or to reconsider technical barriers as mere illusions. Jobs used the reality distortion field to bend people to his will. In meetings, he would rewrite the facts, push boundaries, and persistently insist that his vision was achievable, until everyone else accepted it as truth. This psychological technique wasn't just motivational, it was a form of social engineering, blending hypnotic repetition, sheer willpower, and acute emotional reading. But the darker side of this manipulation was its unpredictability. Jobs could be charming and inspiring, or cold and withering, sometimes in the same conversation. Employees would oscillate between adoration and dread, never sure whether they'd be praised as geniuses or dismissed as fools. The uncertainty itself was part of Jobs' power. It created a climate of anticipation, fear, and desperate striving for approval. His manipulation extended beyond employees to the media and the public. Jobs understood the psychological power of secrecy and surprise, orchestrating product launches like theatrical events. He carefully controlled leaks, rumors, and press relationships, cultivating an aura of mystery that kept the world guessing and talking. Yet Jobs' manipulation was not always malevolent. He often genuinely believed in his vision, and his ability to transmit that belief inspired others to rise to challenges they never thought they could meet. The danger was that the same force that enabled breakthroughs also masked real risks. Silenced dissent and sometimes pushed people beyond their breaking points. Steve Jobs' charisma was not just a personal trait, it was a consciously constructed force. He understood, perhaps better than any tech leader before him, that people don't just buy products, they buy stories, experiences, and identities. Jobs became a master storyteller, using narrative and showmanship to draw people into his world. Publicly, Jobs radiated a kind of magnetic confidence. Every keynote was a ritual: the black turtleneck, the casual jeans, the dramatic pauses, the carefully timed reveals. These were not random choices. They were psychological tools designed to signal authenticity and visionary leadership. This charisma allowed Jobs to build not just a following, but a cult. Apple fans didn't see themselves as customers. They became devotees, defending the brand with an almost religious fervor. Internally, the same dynamic played out. Working at Apple under Jobs was less a job than a mission. Employees described feeling swept up in a wave of purpose, transcending routine work for the promise of changing the world. But there was a darker edge to this cult of personality. Charisma can override critical thinking, and Jobs' presence could intimidate even the most talented collaborators into silence or acquiescence. Disagreement was often met with scorn or exile, reinforcing a psychological hierarchy that put Jobs at the center. The intense loyalty Jobs inspired had profound effects. It drove teams to achieve remarkable things, but it also made them vulnerable to burnout, exploitation, and disillusionment. When the charismatic leader demands everything, followers often give it, sometimes at the expense of their own well-being or ethics. Charisma for Jobs was both a shield and a sword, a way to rally the faithful and fend off the doubters, but also a means of psychological control that left many wondering where admiration ended and manipulation began. Steve Jobs. Psychological complexity can't be understood without examining his formative wounds. Adopted as a baby, he spent much of his life grappling with feelings of abandonment and not belonging. Jobs spoke openly about how this early trauma left a mark, creating both a deep-seated insecurity and a powerful drive to prove his worth. The sense of rejection colored his relationships and leadership style. Jobs demanded absolute loyalty, yet could abruptly turn cold or punitive. Colleagues and friends described an emotional unpredictability, a need to test devotion, sometimes to the breaking point. This push-pull dynamic left people desperate for his approval and fearful of his wrath. At the same time, Jobs channeled his pain into creative ambition. The desire to be seen, to matter, to leave a mark on the world became central to his identity. Every success was a response to early rejection. Every product launch was a declaration of value. Yet the satisfaction from these victories was often fleeting. The old wounds never fully healed, fueling a relentless quest for the next achievement. Jobs' struggles with identity also appeared in his personal life. He sometimes denied paternity of his first child, struggled with intimate relationships, and sought spiritual meaning in ways that veered between the profound and the escapist. The inner conflict between the public icon and the private, uncertain man created a psychological tension that never quite resolved. Trauma for Jobs was both an engine and a shadow, a source of creative fire and emotional turbulence that shaped every facet of his leadership and legacy. If this exploration into Steve Jobs' dark psychology resonates with you, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and comment below. Which iconic figure's mind should we decode next? Your suggestions and engagement drive our next investigations. Don't miss your chance to shape this journey. Steve Jobs inspired millions, but his methods were as much about control as about uplift. He demanded not only technical excellence, but total emotional investment. By framing work as a mission to put a dent in the universe, Jobs gave employees a sense of higher purpose, but also set the stage for psychological exploitation. He created a culture where devotion was expected, and questioning the vision was seen as disloyalty. Jobs would frequently employ divide-and-conquer tactics, pitting colleagues against each other to provoke creativity or weed out the weak. This psychological warfare kept teams on edge, eager for approval and terrified of rejection. Jobs was a master at reframing reality. He would twist failures into stories of resilience, setbacks into opportunities for innovation. This ability to spin the narrative kept hope alive even during crises, but it could also obscure real problems and breed denial. For some, the inspirational vision was empowering. For others, it was a trap, binding them to endless cycles of hope and disappointment. The ambiguity between inspiration and manipulation was central to Jobs' genius. Employees pushed themselves further than they thought possible, but often at the cost of their health, relationships, or ethics. Customers felt part of a movement but also bought into a myth that sometimes glossed over harsh realities of production and business. Jobs' legacy is thus deeply ambivalent. The very methods that sparked innovation also enabled exploitation, burnout, and ethical blind spots. In the world of dark psychology, his genius is both a source of wonder and a warning sign. For Jobs, the pursuit of greatness required sacrifices most are unwilling to make. Personal relationships often suffered as he prioritized work and vision above family and friendship. Colleagues recall periods of intense isolation when Jobs would become completely unreachable. Locked in his own world of ideas and demands, obsession with work took a toll on his health. Even after being diagnosed with cancer, Jobs' reluctance to accept help or deviate from his beliefs led to controversial choices that some argue cost him precious time. This refusal to compromise, even in the face of mortality, reveals the depths of his psychological rigidity. Isolation wasn't just external. Internally, Jobs struggled with emotional volatility, swinging between euphoria and despair, confidence and doubt. Those closest to him saw a man driven as much by inner demons as by vision. The price of genius for Jobs was often loneliness, misunderstanding, and regret. Yet this isolation sometimes fueled breakthroughs. Jobs found clarity in solitude, using it to dream bigger and push further. The paradox is clear. Greatness demands connection and inspiration, but also inflicts wounds that only the lonely can understand. The legacy Jobs left behind is a tapestry of innovation and loss. Apple's meteoric rise is inseparable from the psychological cost paid by its founder and by many who followed his vision. The price of changing the world is measured not just in stock value, but in sleepless nights, broken bonds, and lives transformed, sometimes painfully, by one man's relentless pursuit. Steve Jobs' story is a warning as much as it is an inspiration. His genius demonstrates the extraordinary heights that dark psychology can reach, but also the depths of sacrifice and suffering required. The tools he used, obsession, manipulation, charisma, and trauma, are powerful, but they leave lasting marks for those who seek to emulate Jobs. The lesson is clear. Greatness is never free. The world remembers the breakthroughs, the stunning launches, the charismatic moments. But beneath the surface, there is always a psychological cost, one paid not just by the visionary, but by everyone caught in the orbit of their ambition. Jobs' legacy endures in every device, every product launch, every story told about impossible dreams. But perhaps the most important part of his legacy is the psychological one, the reminder that even the most dazzling genius is haunted by shadows, driven by wounds, and defined by the very darkness they try to escape. Thank you for joining this in-depth journey into Steve Jobs' mind. If you found these revelations thought-provoking, subscribe to The Truth Dark Psychology. Leave your reflections and requests in the comments, and turn on notifications to be the first to uncover our next psychological analysis. Your engagement is the spark that keeps us going. The truth, as always, continues below.